right. So nice to see everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'll go ahead and get things started as people start to trickle in throughout the hour. I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Eleni, and I'm a partner based in New York at KeySearch. I'm really excited to be moderating today's discussion. For those of you who are unfamiliar with us at KeySearch, we are a specialized executive search firm focused on helping companies build diverse, high-performing leadership teams. We work with both venture-backed and privately held companies to find exceptional leaders who align with their vision and goals. At KeySearch, we really understand the complexities of these leadership transitions, especially the shift from founder to CEO. We've actually worked on several founder to CEO leadership transition searches this year, and that's exactly why we're here today. We've noticed that the transition from founder to CEO is one that many founders face as their companies grow, but it's rarely straightforward. There's often a lack of clear guidance for founders navigating this shift, for leaders stepping into this new role, and for teams that are a part of this journey. That's why we've brought in experts who have been through it themselves and specialize in supporting CEOs as they navigate these stages. We're really excited to dive into this topic and hear their valuable insights today. So I'm thrilled to briefly announce our panelists today. Each of them bring a really unique perspective, and we've specifically brought them together for the following reasons. Joe Leech, he is a seasoned coach who specializes in guiding CEOs through the different stages of growth, startups, high growth phases, IPOs, you name it. He's had extensive experience in tech and has worked with startups and Fortune 100 companies. He's truly a wealth of knowledge and excited to have him here. Mark Schoen, he's the CEO at Orderbird and has 23 years of experience leading international organizations in SaaS and payments. He's successfully stepped into the CEO role during a founder transition and can really offer valuable firsthand insights into that process. Hutan Mahalati is a founder who's transitioned into the CEO role within his own ventures, former Y Combinator co-founder and a product leader at hypergrowth global startups. He has a proven track record of scaling companies and leading the shift from founder-led to a CEO-led organization. And I'll let them introduce themselves in more detail very shortly, but really excited to dive into today's conversation. And before we dive in, I've seen some people in the chat where they're joining from today. Are you a founder? Are you part of a leadership team? What challenges have you faced? Throw it in the chat. Oh my God, we have Prague, we have Portugal, New York, Switzerland, all over the US and Europe so far. That is truly incredible. Loving it. If you have any questions throughout this webinar, please do not hesitate to drop those questions in the chat. We'll be sure to address them on our end at the end of the session. So don't worry, we'll leave some time for Q&A, but feel free, don't be shy, ask away, and we are just so happy that you're joining us here today. So thank you for being here. Now that we know a little bit more about our audience here, who we are, I'm really excited to turn the floor over to our panelists. As I mentioned, they all bring a wealth of experience to the conversation, and they've navigated these leadership transitions firsthand. So let's start with some brief introductions. I'll ask you all to share a little bit about your background. And Joe, let's begin with you.
Yeah, hi. So I've been working about 20 plus years in tech. I work with CEOs from large enterprises right down to smaller startups, and I kind of help them with moments of truth. The majority of my career has been working both with startups, but also with large enterprises, and I have a kind of a shared experience across both of those. I've written a few books on psychology. A lot of my background is in product and user experience before I got into coaching, and yeah, a lot of what I help CEOs with is transitions.
Love that. Well, Mark, tell me a little bit more about you.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I think the part of my background relevant to this discussion today, I spent 15 years as a division president for international for an Atlanta-based startup called Radiant Systems. After about 15 years, we sold that company to NCR for $1.2 billion. And then I spent about 4 years as an angel investor working with a lot of early stage startups. One of those startups was Orderbird AG that you mentioned, based in Berlin. And ultimately in 2017, I joined Orderbird operationally and transitioned to the CEO role, and went through a situation I think extremely relevant to today's discussion. We sold Orderbird back in 2022, and I left the business not long after that. But over the past couple of years, I've had the opportunity to be in a lot of conversations with VCs and with founders who are going through these kind of transition discussions where they're figuring out what the next stage leadership of the company should be. So I've had the chance to talk to a lot of different people about this recently.
Love that. And Hutan, tell me a little bit more about you.
Sure. Hello, everybody. Excited to be here. Love this topic in general. My career, the first 7 or so, was in the automotive industry across the globe. And then post-graduate school, I sort of moved into the tech industry, as in Silicon Valley tech, and started as a founder. Been a founder twice, most recently at Hyperseed, which was the Y Combinator company, fintech, B2B fintech that you mentioned. I have been at startups of different stages, from startup to scale up in Silicon Valley and Europe, and including Rocket Internet, which at the time, as leading the product team, probably the most successful incubator and venture builder, where I was advising directly founders of 14 companies at a time and more. And so I've seen companies at very different stages with different founders, different issues. And today, putting it all together through my consulting practice that you see on there, P3, I advise CEOs of both traditional companies, but also scaling tech startups on their organizational change mandates through a product-centric lens. So obviously, that's sort of my specialty. So hopefully we'll have a discussion and tap into some of that experience as we go forward. Thank you.
I love to hear that, and you all are very impressive. So it's been great to be in the room with you all virtually. I would love to just start by transitioning to our first topic. I'd love to kind of start by diving into this critical challenge for founders that are transitioning to CEOs, balancing that long-term vision with the operational efficiency that is needed to scale. Joe, let's begin with you. As a CEO coach, what strategies do you recommend for founders to transition from a visionary role to one that focuses on day-to-day operations?
I think the first thing I help people do is to go through a bit of a mindset shift. The thing you kind of have to realize about being a founder and the skills that make you great at a founder, setting a vision, raising money, being the excitement and energy behind the business, are not the same set of skills that can help you scale it or manage it. And so typically you can see CEOs falling into two distinct kind of roles. There's a continuum between the two of them. One of them is laying the tracks, right? So you're laying the tracks, you're forging off across the continent, you're at the lead there, you're leading things forward. And the second role is running the trains, right? Making sure things run on time, on budget, trains are fully fueled, all of those operational things. And for you to be good at one of them doesn't necessarily mean you can be good at both of them. And most people you meet tend to be one or the other. And most founders who've got that big vision aren't great at running the trains. And often they can beat themselves up when it comes to the operational side of running a business, that they're not great at it, right? It's not their zone of genius. Maybe they're pretty good at it, but it's not their zone of excellence. So the thing that often happens when you kind of hit post-Series A or a certain size of growth, when the business is sort of bigger than a few pizzas worth of people, is you need to have either a co-founder ideally, or somebody who can manage the operations for your business, right? That kind of messy middle. Because most visionary startup founders are great at the big vision, and they're often great at the detail. They're not great at that messy middle of getting there. So it's understanding and hiring, or making sure there's somebody else in the business who's great at running the trains, because you can't do or be excellent at both of those things. It can happen, and there are unique individuals that do it, but most folk aren't. And it's okay to let go of one or other of those things when you're a founder of a business, when you're moving to that next transition stage.
Absolutely. That's so interesting. And thanks for bringing that insight. Mark, you've been a CEO with a focus on that strategy and culture. How have you balanced the high level vision with the practical aspects of managing an international and dispersed organization?
Well, I think a couple things in your question to I think drill down on. One, if you talk about dispersed organizations, which I've had some experience with, the first thing I'd say, you have to spend time with people, and video can certainly be part of that. But I think you really have to get on airplanes and spend time in people's offices, shoulder to shoulder with them, meeting with their customers if they've got customers in those markets, seeing what the day-to-day life is in those different places. Because if you're going to get people to buy into your message, into your vision, into your ideas, into your goals, they have to know that you understand them, that you empathize with them, that you've seen what they're living every day. So there's always an excuse not to jump on the plane and go see people, and you have to. You got to go spend a lot of time with them if you're going to have a dispersed organization that rallies around a global vision. And then I think the other part of it, if you just talk about day-to-day operational efficiency and vision, it's getting a vision that you are consistent with, because I think something in early stages, for very good reasons, sometimes the vision is not consistent because you see a lot of pivots as they're trying to find traction. But as you get in that next stage, having a vision that is consistent, that's repeated, that everybody understands, and then you build up your goals and your actions underneath that.
There's a couple of traps there, isn't there, Mark? I've spotted there as well. Which a lot of the early stage founders can fall into. That first one you talked about, which is really important to go and visit the teams, but it's rarely urgent. And that can be a real trap for a lot of people, because you're often, if you're an inexperienced leader, you can spend all your time fighting fires at certain points in that business. And that means you don't do the important stuff like getting on the plane, meeting customers and meeting teams.
Absolutely. And I think that even goes where you see a lot of offshoring of development resources and things like that. And the tendency may be to say, well, they're not really part of the team, or they're a different part of the team, and so I don't need to spend time with them because they're not even our company or something like that. And I think that's the wrong way to think about it. You need to spend time with everybody, everywhere.
Completely agree. I think those are both important points as well. And Hooten, I'm curious, as someone who has scaled products globally, what challenges have you seen founders face when they're trying to blend this vision with these operational demands of a growing organization?
Mark touched on a word that is part of my answer here, is a pivot. And I like to talk about two different sets of examples I've seen. One is co-founder relationships, and the other is hiring, and specifically hiring the wrong people at the wrong time. So, often when there are co-founders, and usually startups have two to begin with, and companies never end up where they started. And this can happen. This happened to my last company. We did essentially two pivots, mini pivots, but pivots. And I have seen so often that, one founder, maybe the CEO, is going to pivot the company in a direction that could save the company or change the business entirely. And the other co-founder completely disagrees and is emotionally detached from this new direction. They have a seat, they often have a board position, they have a lot of equity, but they check out. And I think I don't have to explain how toxic that can be to the organization, because anybody in the organization, even if it's 2 people to 10 people, pick up on that anxiety and the tension between the founders. The other one is, and I see this when things start gathering pace, the founder CEO or the founder who is in that role gets busier and busier and busier, and they think, before hiring functional leaders for things like HR and marketing specifically, I see this, I'm going to hire a COO. At least in Silicon Valley, any startup that hired a CEO, that was a huge red flag. That means you're going to throw a bunch of different topics to someone who is not an expert in those areas, and you're not doing the job of either doing it yourself and learning how to do it until you can hire that functional expert, and almost all the time hiring that kind of person, the wrong person at the wrong time in the company, causes far more problems than it solves. So those are the two sets I have seen over and over and over again.
Yeah,
I have a product friend of mine. He hires people into product organizations and startups, and he always says, yeah, I always want to be the first product hire in any business, right? The first product hire or the first CEO has a horrible time of it until the founder figures it out. And then if you're the second one doing that role, it's great. It's like, they're way better at it, and it's a nicer place for you to land.
Yeah.
I have said I will never do that again, because I've been in that position and it's not a fun position.
No.
Yeah, absolutely. And hiring is, as we say at Key Search, the most important decision you'll ever make. So wanted to shift even a little bit, hiring to culture. We actually ran a poll on LinkedIn, what the biggest leadership challenge for founders that are transitioning to CEOs or going through this transition. And the largest response was actually scaling culture. So I feel like that ties in really well with talking about hiring and balancing those needs as well. But now that we've talked a little bit about balancing the vision and operations, I'd love to talk about managing and empowering teams during this transition. Mark, with your extensive experience leading teams, what are some of those common challenges that founders face when it comes to building and empowering their teams as they move into a CEO role?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of skills that a founder or CEO has to develop if the organization's starting to scale. I mean, one of them, which is nowhere near as easy as it sounds, is great delegation skills. Right, that's something that probably a coach like Joe is probably really good at helping people with. But learning how to delegate, right, making your expectations clear, how you follow up, how you don't micromanage, how you trust and you're okay to get some things wrong. That's a huge skill, I think, in terms of scaling. The other one is what I like to talk about is making sure people know what they need to do, but not how they need to do it. So in other words, after getting a lot of collaboration and input as the leader, as the CEO, as the founder, you say, this is what we're trying to achieve. This is what's absolutely critical that we do, but allowing the smart people that you've hired to figure out how to get there, and not trying to tell them how they need to do their jobs or what the best way to do that is. Maybe have conversations about it. Maybe you get educated because of all these smart people that you've hired on how they're doing their jobs. But I think that's, to me, in a nutshell, is let them know where we're going and let them figure out how we're going to get there.
Absolutely. And I think that ensures that team alignment and shareholder trust as well. What do you say?
Well, it's also a shared theme between your answer, Mark, there, and what Hutan said before about the COO thing as well, is those first hires and culture. It's often a dumping of all the crap that the founder doesn't enjoy doing onto the first layer of management that comes. And that's not delegation. It's a very different thing that people are doing. And it's that true definition of what delegation is and how it can work that's often missing from, founders.
Absolutely. And Joe, I mean, what are some common mistakes that you've seen founders make when transitioning to CEO in terms of team management, and how can they empower their teams effectively?
I think the biggest mistake, and I think certainly the thing I probably coach on the most for founder CEOs, is that kind of inflection point when the business is maybe 100, 200 people, and the senior leadership team, that C-suite you've probably had since you were sort of 20 people. And you've got a lot of subject matter experts. You've got a subject matter expert on, growth, on product, on tech, but you haven't got leaders in each of those places. And that's often where the biggest challenge comes for that second level of leadership, is when you maybe have to start transitioning out some of those folks into and transition in leaders, because subject matter experts get you to that, that's a certain point within the business, but they don't push you forward. To Mark's point before, when you're a visionary early on, it's a very clear visionary when you're a startup. You know where you want to get to. The challenge a lot of startup founders find is when they get there, they're like, oh, what's next? We've got to do this much, much bigger. We've got to 10x this thing now. And the leadership you need to do that isn't the same leadership as you had before. They need to be coming to you to say, here's what we need to do next. Here's how we're going to get to that next place. And that's a very different set of skills from those first subject matter experts that you hire. You need to be really hiring a series of kind of almost mini CEOs in each of those roles who can do the strategy, do the vision, and manage a bigger team on your behalf to get you to that next goal, because that's a lot of pressure on you to set that when you've already achieved the thing you probably set out to do in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. And Hutan, I know with your experience scaling companies like Depop, how do you approach this team building and empowerment during the hypergrowth phases, especially when the leadership dynamic is changing a lot in the organization?
Yeah, I mean, at the base of it all, you have to take a long-term view, and I think there's two pieces for me. There's vision and there's process. So vision to me is clearly the long term. Where are we going to be? Where is sort of this glorious endpoint that should pull us in the long term when things are changing on a day-to-day basis. And I think vision is leadership. That's leading people somewhere. But then there's a task of execution, management, focus. What are we doing today? What are we doing the next month, the next quarter? And I'm a fervent student, believer, and practitioner of OKRs. I'm doing that with a client right now, both on the vision and the OKR process, because then you have to do the work. And I think the OKR process, when executed correctly, which means you focus on a few things, not too many things, and you have measurement, and you push people towards ambitious goals. Famously, you're supposed to get 70% by the end of each quarter, otherwise you weren't pushing hard enough. That, and critically, it sanctions taking risk without a blame culture. So reach for ambitious targets. You know what the vision is, and on a daily basis, these are the things to focus on. And again, I have seen people just not follow these proven concepts that are so simplistic. People think, oh, it's too simple. That can't be the answer. I think often the powerful precepts in life are simple. So vision and process combined, I think, achieve that. And OKRs is sort of like the process that I think is one of the most powerful I've seen.
Absolutely. And Hootan, that's actually a perfect transition from those team dynamics into this broader company strategy that I would love to talk to you all about. One of the key struggles that founders are facing is balancing those long-term goals with the pressure for short-term wins. Hootan, I would love for you to build on this. How do you help founders navigate that balancing act while scaling a company? It's easy to get caught up in those short-term wins, but how do you maintain that focus on long-term value creation, especially in a stressful environment like a startup?
Yeah, so on this topic, stressful business, and I've learned this over time, like if you are in a company, no matter what the role is, there is a truth. And Andy Grove, one of the stalwarts of Silicon Valley, talked about, famously quipped, only the paranoid survive. And it may sound very dark when you're in a context of optimism and vision, but I understand this so well because, especially from a startup perspective, I've been there so many times myself. It's the longest time until profitability. And even then, you're trying not to die as a company. It's risk. And if you reach success, you're expected to have more success. Once you have metrics, or Series A especially, and more success means that, people want to knock you off your pedestal often, right? So it never ends. So I think leaders should not be afraid to instill this concept in the employees and the team to say, this is not to demotivate you. This is to be adults about the nature of business and to avoid complacency. Then what do? Then it's a matter of culture. And, one of the most astounding business almost turnarounds I've seen in my career is when Satya Nadella came into Microsoft. And Microsoft was a joke, especially again in my time in the Valley. Google was the fresh hot startup, and Meta grew up, and they were regarded as stagnant. They now have made Google look flat-footed in the era of AI, and are known for agility at scale. And I've wondered about, what did he do? How did he turn this around? And he credits the transformation of Microsoft to going from a culture previous to him of know-it-all, which means arrogant, right, and complacent in my mind, to learn it all, which means humble and agile. Again, very simple, but he spent his time changing the culture of the teams inside Microsoft. And again, I see if it works at a scale of hundreds of thousands of employees, why shouldn't it work for every other company on earth? So I think the truth about business, but also instilling the right culture to make sure that it's not demotivation.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to put it, and such a great example as well. And Joe, in your work with founders, what are some of those key tactics that you might use to emphasize for CEOs to keep a balance between those short-term wins and the long-term strategic goals?
I think what's interesting often about founders is they struggle to celebrate and live in their success, certainly in the short term. Is you find them, if you work for a founder, it can be quite challenging, because often they won't celebrate it. It'd be like, we need to get to 5 million ARR, and you get there, and the founder's like, all right, yeah, great. We need to get to 10 million ARR. And as a team, that can be quite demotivating for you, because most founders have got this big, audacious vision in mind. They can see it there. And the steps on the way, they struggle to celebrate because they can always see something bigger, right? They get to the top of the hill and they see a bigger mountain behind that all the time. And that can be quite exhausting and demotivating for a lot of the team. So a lot of what I do with founders is actually to reflect on their successes, on the short-term successes, to say, we have achieved this year, to celebrate with the team, to be that person in the room, celebrating with them rather than back on the computer coding for the next thing that they're doing, is to stop, reflect, look back, use that short-term motivation to push towards long-term goals, because they're basically the two sides of the same coin. If you're not doing both of them and celebrating both of them, you're never going to get to that big goal at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you both for talking a little bit about how to manage that. With the strategy in place, another important aspect of the CEO role is fostering a culture of accountability and ownership. Mark, how do you approach accountability in your leadership, and how can a founder transitioning to CEO instill that same type of ownership within the organization?
Yeah, I think a couple of things I want to mention. One is, I think, go back to what Hutan said about OKRs and how you do that. I think is certainly a great approach, because goals are well documented, transparent, usually shared, and I think that's the best thing you do to create accountability. One point I do want to make, which kind of spans a couple of these questions that I think has been unspoken, is when we were talking about these kind of situations maybe 4 or 5 years ago, it might be that the company got bigger and now it's more complicated. You're trying to scale something that's had a certain level of success, raise some money, and now has to scale, and it needs a new skill set.
Yeah.
What I've seen over the last couple of years is a completely different situation, right? And is that the people who have put money in, so the VCs who have put money in, are now worried about their investments, right? Because multiples have contracted. Maybe the business isn't growing quite like it was before. So kind of tying a couple of these points together, when you talk about long-term vision, what I would really emphasize to founders, if they're feeling pressure either to change the way they're working, right, to evolve into a different kind of CEO, or feeling pressure to bring in an external CEO, you really need to get aligned with your external investors to see what's changed in their mindset and why is it that they're putting this pressure on you all of a sudden. Some of it's natural, right? I mean, everything's going to change no matter what, but find out what's actually that, because the long-term vision probably doesn't matter at all if you don't get to the next fundraising or the next corporate development milestone. And you've got to have the shareholder group aligned on that, let's call it middle-term goal, before you worry too much about what your long-term is, because something has probably changed in your investor group if you raised money 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's a real trap, isn't it, as well, Mark? Because often what you see is those investors and those members of the board seeing the fact that the founder isn't performing and thinking about that, transitioning them away. There's nothing worse than being in that founder position and being transitioned, right? You lose the control over what's going on, and that can sneak up on you if you're not really thinking about and addressing what the needs and the fears are of your investors. If you're not actively addressing it, that's when bad things can happen to you and you can lose control over what you're trying to do.
Exactly. There's a lot of things that are being unspoken, and I think really forcing the conversations in the most constructive way possible is what you need to do to make sure you understand why is it that it seemed like 6 months ago or a year ago we were all buddies, and now suddenly there's a lot of pressure and tension and unspoken things happening in the boardroom, or worse yet, outside the boardroom, in the investor group. Why is that happening? And because if you're gonna evolve and change, you've got to figure out what you're trying to evolve and change into, if you're a founder, or figure out if that's really the journey you want to be on, because your vision and the investor needs may be in conflict with one another.
And it's that point as well where you've got to let go of being right as well as a founder. You can't, a big part of being an early stage founder is having true conviction in your dream and what you're trying to do. And at a certain point, you've got to have that humility to question yourself. Am I on the right path? Are we doing the right things? And just questioning that yourself is a big deal, because you've spent so long building that muscle of being the person up there who's 100% bought into everything that's going on. And actually, letting go of that can be a real challenge for a founder, really deeply tied to their identity. So it's a really challenging moment of truth for a founder when things are a little bit wobbly at certain points in that early stage.
Yeah.
I could have one more comment on that, because I think it's important. Is so we naturally tend towards, after you get past the initial stage of a startup and it's starting to scale, we start to talk, as we have in this conversation, of, hey, how do you get better at managing operations? How do you get better at metrics? How do you get better at all those things? All great questions. The other thing you better ask yourself is, how do I get better at stakeholder management? Something that maybe I didn't have to do when the only people who invested in my company were friends and family, or a couple of really supportive angel investors. Now I've got outside VC money. One of the skill sets I need to develop as a founder or as a CEO is shareholder management, stakeholder management. And that's a whole nother set of skills that are nothing to do with managing metrics, or very little to do with managing metrics, very little to do with the founder innovation type phase. And now it's a whole nother dimension that you need to master, especially in difficult times.
Absolutely. And that is, there's so many different things that you need to manage. And Hooten, I have a question in terms of fostering accountability without compromising innovation. You know, you're managing stakeholder management, VCs. How do you do all of that and stay accountable without compromising the innovation that's needed to be successful?
Yeah, I think this is kind of tying up a few things that we have mentioned, my colleagues here. I think the most powerful way to handle accountability is hiring correctly. And what is correct, I think at the base of it, is self-managing people. Again, you know, in startups, you're filtering so closely those early days, and this was instilled in me that you need a certain DNA. And I think companies need self-managing people, no matter what their level of experience is. You know, 1 year or 10 years, it's sort of this innate, intrinsic motivation that I look for, at least in people, no matter what their role is. Because then the processes sort of are there to amplify what they are, right? They don't fix these issues per se. You know, these things can be coached out, but not always, right? Again, I quote famous people just because the proof is in the pudding. You know, Steve Jobs said, the greatest people are self-managing. They don't need to be managed. What they need is a common vision, and that's what leadership is. Leadership is having a vision, being able to articulate it so that the people around you can understand it, and getting consensus critical on a common vision, right? So that is one. And the other is less really is more. I'm going to underline it because I've already talked about it. And again, here, if you know, I have an example from Steve Jobs and Apple himself to follow the story. Innovation requires time and reflection. You know, especially when you're under pressure and you're supposed to innovate. There's tasks, there's deliverables, there's launches, there's marketing.
Yeah.
But you're supposed to innovate. How do you do that in an organization that is, at the end of the day, supposed to generate revenue?
Yeah.
And I think if you have fewer things to focus on, you will naturally have more reflection for that portion of time, that quarter, that initiative. And again, I think people who have studied the history of companies, great companies, remember that Jobs came back in, I think, 1997. The company was on its knees, close to bankruptcy. He asked for $150 million from Bill Gates, his nemesis and friend. And he famously cut the Apple product line down to 4, right? And the rest is history. It became the first $1 trillion company. And again, I am so shocked at how often far lesser founders / CEOs than Steve Jobs ignore this. They want to do everything, and we want to do this because they think saying I want to do 5 things is ambition. I think it's just it's actually not knowing what you're doing as a long-term leader, right? So those are the things that I look to.
Absolutely. And Hujan, those are great points. And I feel tie in really great with the next topic that I want to talk about, a difficult, kind of juicy topic, but a really crucial question for founders. When do you think it's time to step down as a CEO? Hutan, I know you've had the unique experience of leading both as a founder and as an executive. Given your journey, how do you assess when a leader might be holding a company back? And what are some key factors or metrics you look at to determine if it's time for a founder to transition out of the CEO role? I'll have you start, and I would love for everyone to jump in.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to say that for the right person, for the right founder, I don't think it's a given that they should step down per se if they are willing to do what it takes to transition and upskill themselves, right? We'll get to that in a second. But I think, and by the way, examples of that, Exhibit A, for me is Mark Zuckerberg, who I think is a better CEO than a founder. He had one innovation early on, and even that is questionable. But the rest of it, through multiple changes, I think he learned what to do to remain a great CEO, because he wants to remain in charge of his company, right? But he had a lot of mentors. The other one is Brian Chesky, who famously makes himself a student of people like Walt Disney and Steve Jobs and others. So I think if you do want to remain in the role and not step down, well, you have to upskill. You have to surround yourself with mentors, learn from them, and fill in the gaps. Sometimes, though, and I think Joe was talking about transitioned out, right? So sometimes it either takes care of itself, because you realize, if you're self-aware, 0 to 1 is where I shine.
Yeah.
I don't want to do taxes and compliance and all the stuff that your role as a CEO, the buck stops with you. And they say, you know what, this isn't fun anymore, and I'm not good at this. And a good founder then goes and finds the right leader and empowers them to do the things that he or she is not good at. These are the good cases. Then there's those cases where they're not aware, they don't want to learn, they just want power. And this is where ultimately I think it's dirty, it's tough, it's nasty. A good board,
I think that's bad.
will take care of it. Well, they will transition that person out, and those are unfortunate cases. So I think, to sum it up, if you're not learning to be the thing that is demanded of you at that stage of the company throughout the life of the company, then I think it's time that you give way, and it's your duty, frankly, as a shareholder, to yourself, if nothing else, if your own incentive, your financial incentive, it behooves you to.
And I think Mark, and I think perfect kind of example of this, Mark, as the CEO who's stepped in during this founder transition, can you share your experience a little bit and what advice maybe you would give to founders on identifying that crucial moment?
Yeah, so I was extremely lucky in my situation. Had a founder that was very proactive. He recruited me ahead of, he saw the tension in the board, but he was very proactive. He recruited me, he built a relationship with me, and was able to really steer that transition. We were co-CEOs for a time, and then I became CEO. So lesson number one is proactivity. Second thing I would say, for either side of that equation, if you have a founder or an external CEO coming in, again, the experience I had and what I would urge everyone to try to find is partnership. And of course, everyone goes, of course, I'm a great partner. Of course, I'm going to do everything. And so things that I would say is, in my situation, we realized we wanted no daylight between us, right? Because we had very different personalities, very different approaches, very different management styles. And so what we decided early on is we weren't going to show the differences. We would show our differences in styles. Of course, it's who we are as people, but we weren't going to show kind of this non-alignment. And so we decided that every issue we would discuss and disagree behind closed doors, but we're in front of people. We were going to show that we had already come to alignment on this, and not have those be aired or seen in public, because we'd really work the issue to get ourselves aligned. I think that's important if you're going to be in a partnership situation, and people usually say they want to be in partnership situations, and so decide that's what you're committed to, because it takes extra time. Those are some of the thoughts, but certainly I would ask anybody, and this goes on to what Hutan said, is that if your company's gotten big enough where you have investors, where you have a significant number of employees, the question you always have to ask yourself is, am I doing the right thing for all of my stakeholders? You have employees who have dedicated their careers. They deserve to be taken care of in the best way possible. You have people who have risked money and time and reputation into your company. And so as you think about, it's not your company, it is a company that you're the steward of, that you're responsible for, and you have to say, how do I take care of our customers in the best way possible? How do I take care of our employees in the best way possible, as well as the external investors?
Yeah, and Joe, I'm sure you have some insight here. How do you help leaders recognize when this decision is the best decision for them and the company and the shareholders?
I think it touches on a couple of things that Hutan said and Mark have said as well. It's a big part of it for a founder is identity. Is often for so long in the journey of the business, you are the business and the business is you, and you struggle to see any separation between the two of them. So some warning signs to me are a lot of founders saying things to me like, this is my baby, we're a family. No, right? This is not the case, because I also work with a lot of founders on the road to an exit. You would never sell your child, but of course you're going to sell your business at some point. So at some point you need to split your identity out from the business. And that's also splitting your identity out from being a founder. And once you've done that, that allows you to see it a lot more objectively. Because the challenge you have, and a lot of the effort you put early on as a founder, is being really the voice of the business, being the business. And you become very subjective in the way that you see it, because any attack on the business or the style of you is often an attack on you and the business. You need to separate that stuff out. Shifting your identity away is the first step to embracing that change. And that change can come from you reinventing yourself away from being that founder into being a CEO, and they are different things. You can reinvent yourself, or as Mark quite rightly said, is you hire then you look to hire a CEO who can support you and take the reins for the business in the second half of what's going on. You can still be involved, but again, you need a strong agreement in place with that CEO coming in as to what your roles and responsibilities will be in. But really and wholly, you need to break that identity away from you and the business being the same thing, because they're simply not.
Absolutely.
May I make a quick comment, Eleni?
Yes, yeah.
Having gone through it myself, I think maybe founders know, and I think everyone on this call probably knows that what you just talked about, this separating yourself from the business, if things go well or not well, is so painful. And I don't think enough founders reach out for help and psychological help, mental help to deal with this, because it's not easy after you poured everything. Because founders, you tend to sacrifice everything else in life that makes life worth living for that company to succeed, because there's no real other option for, frankly, in many ways. And so when that's gone, there's this void. There's this silence that drives you crazy. What do I do now? And I think I cannot emphasize go seek help to go through this to you, because it's deeply lonely and it's debilitating. And I've seen people not recover, fall apart. And there goes another year of your life, just
or marriage, right? I fix as many marriages as I fix startups, right? It's the way of these things. It's you feel like you have to give everything away for this business, again, because your identity is there. You don't. There's always an alternative way of doing it.
Yeah, and you can't explain it. That's all on you. And so don't wallow in that misery. Reflect a little bit, but get help to come out of the often darkness as soon as possible and live the rest of your life. There's so much more to do, and you have learned so much as a founder. Most people don't ever learn as much as you do if you stop and reflect. So I just underline everything you said. It's clearly emotional for me too, thinking about it. So advice to founders.
Absolutely. And I think that is such a great segue into our next topic of embracing this growth mindset, which is essential because you are going through such an emotional and challenging, and it's your whole life. So how would you say, embracing this growth mindset, especially those that are making that shift from founder to CEO? Joe, I'll let you start, but you've worked closely with CEOs who have transitioned from the founder role. How do you encourage them to adopt a growth mindset, especially when they're used to maybe a more flexible founder role? And is there any specific practices you recommend to help them foster that mindset?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's another mindset shift. To grow a business, you have to grow yourself. If you aren't growing and expanding your knowledge, your mindset, and your skill set, your business won't. It's as simple as that. You can't be a one-trick pony. It'll get you to a certain point in your business growth, but it won't get you further. So you need to start reinventing yourself and your skill set and being open to new ideas and new ways of doing things. So the first step really is adopting a growth mindset in yourself, your skill set and your mindset about things. You really need to want to and realize you have to change within the way you approach pretty much everything you do to be able to be a leader that can grow a business at all the different stages that exist. So, I work from very early stage startups of 5 to 10 people to enterprises with 10,000 people.
Yeah.
The way a CEO turns up in both of those two situations is wholly and completely different, and justifiably so. And the CEOs who have built that success and have grown these businesses are very different people to the CEOs who've started on that particular journey. Like Hootan mentioned Mark Zuckerberg, a wholly different human being to the way he started from these things, right? And that's for the good and for the better of him, his business, his employees, his customers, and for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And Hootan too, I would love to hear, how do you maybe advise leaders to balance the rapid scaling while fostering this culture of learning and adaptability? And Mark, I would love to hear as well from you, any advice that you might have.
Is it Mark first, or
All of you go first?
Yeah, I think we covered this a little bit about understanding at baseline that the environment is at the end of the day, it's unromantic, right? It's about financial success, and businesses either survive or not. And I think on top of that, we've touched on the same words over and over again: culture, self-managing people. Right. And, companies are a reflection of the DNA of the founder. And I really love what Joe said. It's from within. So if you don't change from within, because everyone's watching, you have no idea how much people are watching and how much people know everything in an organization, what's happening in that boardroom. And, a great CEO comes out, like, one of my former bosses, after every board meeting, he would come out and, first of all, we had a culture of trust. We are going to be sharing very, very sensitive information about the company, with the entire company, from the support desk all the way to, the chief product officer, just so we know what's going on. And again, I think one of my colleagues, I think Mark mentioned transparency. So he would come out and he would say, this is what the board said: the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
And including critique on him from the board, that you're not doing X, saying, look, I'm going to change, I'm going to improve, I'm going to seek help. I'll give you one example on this. His co-founder and CTO needed to basically, it was clear that we needed somebody else in charge of the engineering organization. And we started looking, and we hired a search firm, and after a while, he came back and told us in an all-hands meeting, and all hands are very critical for culture. Look, one of the investors asked me how much time I'm spending on looking for a VP of engineering. And I said, well, 20% of the week. And then he said, well, what's the most important thing to you in the company right now? He said, hiring a VP of engineering. And it's like, 20%? You see why? You need to be spending 90 to 100% on this P0 topic for the business. And and he switched to that mode, and within 2 weeks, he'd found someone who came in and became the VP of engineering and product, by the way, at the time. So it's leading by example and showing that you're changing, I think, trickles down to the company and vice versa, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I know I asked Mark, but I think would love to just go into some closing remarks before we dive into the audience Q&A, because I think you guys have some great points here. As we wrap up this conversation, could each of you share one key takeaway or piece of advice for the founders or people who've gone through a transition in the audience? I would love to hear either a resource, habit, mindset shift, anything that you think is essential for the founder CEO transition. And Mark, I would love for you to kick us off here.
Yeah, I think mine would be get a mentor. Get a mentor very specifically that has, if at all possible, who has been through what you're going through, but did so 5 years ago or something like that, because that person is going to be empathetic. That person is going to be able to speak very credibly from experience. And in certain situations and cultures, company cultures, learning by doing and figuring things out is great. After you get a certain stage, there's too much at risk, right? You can't learn by doing all the time. Some of the bigger decisions and bigger habits need to be coached. So get a mentor, get a great mentor.
Great. Joe, how about you?
I think one of my key takeaways from a lot of this, what we talked about today, is that the need for change across all elements of what you do, both the business, both the leadership team, and both yourself, all the way through, that every different transition point requires a different approach and probably a different set of skills and a different team to do that. And change is good. And, you know, it's key that you're instigating and recognizing when that change needs to happen, rather than, as we mentioned before, change, unfortunately, happening to you.
Yeah. And Houghton, how about you?
I have 3 bullets on this. It's know thyself. It's surprise, surprise, seek mentors, and it's bringing people better than you. And I just double click on that third one. Bad leaders are threatened by people who are better than them because they worry about their job. What if that person is better? What if the board thinks that person's better than me and takes a job? Well, again, either you shouldn't be out of that position because you are good enough, or if that happens, so what? That's good. That's good news. As you know, you have someone from within to maybe take the role for you. So I think great leaders bring in great people who are better than them, because it can only have value for the long term of the organization. Especially if you are going to transition out, I would say reputation is everything in business. It's the biggest truth there is. And how do you want to be remembered, right? I think you want to be remembered for, as Mark alluded earlier, you did well by the company.
Yeah.
You're duty to the company, not to your job satisfaction or longevity, right? So it is your duty as a good leader to do the right thing, and you know, whether you stay in or not, all those 3 things I think are valid in both cases.
Absolutely.
And I echo Lisa's comment in the comments as well about ego too. I think we touched on it a lot of the time, is understanding when your ego's talking. There's nothing wrong with having a strong ego.
100%.
It's just knowing when that's driving you and when not to let that drive you as well. So your point, know thyself, understand. It's great to have an ego, and that's really powerful, but it shouldn't be dictating all of the decisions and approaches that you're taking.
Company before ego.
Company before ego. Let's get that on merch.
Yes, actually.
for real. Wow. Thank you, panelists, for all of those amazing insights. Truly has been an incredible conversation so far. I wanted to take a moment to address any questions that have come in from the audience. I've seen a couple come in through the chat, so I'll do my best to get through as many as I can. Feel free to jump in as I go, panelists. The first question I have, it says, it looks like it's for Joe. What portion of your time are you spending coaching versus mentoring and advising clients? What are they really looking for when they come to you?
Yeah, so I spend 100% of my time coaching. So I have been a founder myself. I try and avoid, so mentoring typically is, I've seen this challenge before, here's how I addressed it. Here are some challenges and some problems I have seen before, watch out for these. So as to Mark said, you know, you learn a lot from somebody who's a couple of years ahead of you in terms of what they've done, you know, 3, 4, 5 years ahead as a mentor, because they've seen and they understand your challenges. That's not what I do as a coach. My job is to kind of hold a mirror up to you and say, is this the way you want to be? Is there a better way of doing that? To really be a thought partner versus really explaining what I would do in your situation. And it's an important difference. You can have a coach and a mentor, and I encourage the CEOs I work with to have both. And picking up a question related to this as well from Lisa as well, is I work with probably about 20%, 30% female founders versus male founders in this regard. And what I've definitely found with female founders, you know, approximately, not everybody's the same, but they are more open to supporting and changing the way that they do. They're more open to external support. They are less, not surprisingly, driven by their ego, and they often adapt and change far quicker than their male counterparts. And that I find uniquely refreshing, which is why I love to work with female founders, because they're a lot more like that. But there's definitely a mindset shift in the way I have to work with male founders, in kind of points helping them understand why they need to change. Whereas often I find with female founders, they are much more open to it and receptive to it, and basically do it ahead of the time that it really needs to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. So for our second question that we've gotten from the audience, it's to all 3 of you, so feel free to jump in. With the same separation that is necessary for founders in ensuring they objectively view their company as the business to be kind of true and relevant for bringing in top tier talent. And their comment is oftentimes the mindset buy-in required by founders and employees might not be aligned with that ethos. So what are your thoughts on that?
What can you maybe, was that last portion, the alignment of which ethos? Maybe you could help because I'm not reading that comment.
Yeah. So a kind of if the same separation that's necessary for founders in ensuring that they can objectively view their business as the business. Have you seen that as like bringing in top tier talent? Because sometimes that buy-in that's required by founders and employees might not be aligned with that. I don't know if that.
So, I'm not sure if this gets exactly at the question or not, but I think it's in the general area. One of them is, I think, an admirable quality in people and in founders is loyalty. And sometimes loyalty then becomes the only, or it becomes the predominant factor. And so when you're looking at changing leadership, there's a sense of loyalty that, hey, this person got me to where we are. How could I possibly replace him or her with a leader that can help me scale better? And I think one of the things you have to tell yourself there, not in one day, but as you go through that process, is that it could be this person is miserable in their job and that their identity has become intertwined with the startup in a similar way to how the founders has, and that they could be more successful someplace else, going back one step to an earlier stage startup, and you need to help them to see that and reflect. So I think that's one thing is want to bring that leadership in. And then of course, if you're then having to manage that with an employee base, then it comes down to transparency and communication and things like that. Because of course, if people have been through the trenches together, really fighting the good fight to get this company where it's gotten to, they're going to feel tremendous loyalty. And you have to be extremely sensitive to people's emotions and relationships and feelings on that.
Absolutely.
I had to reflect. I was going back in my memory bank of myself and others, because it has happened. New boss comes in, company changes dynamic. Loyalty versus, is this the right leader for my growth and can I be as good? Those are the things I would focus on. And I think, look, they say to make an omelet, you have to break some eggs. And sometimes you realize, and it's okay, by the way, it's okay to realize with this change, I'm no longer a fit for the organization or for the role. And you need to know when to get off the bus because it's going somewhere else because someone else is driving, right?
Yeah.
But and I've seen both. It's happened to me where, the reporting line changed so dramatically, and I made a decision, and I have left before because I was like, this is holding me back. I can't be as good an employee for the company anymore if I feel this way. And I have seen others who were so, they weren't as affected, but also the mission of the company drove them perhaps somebody else, and they stayed for the long term because they were there for, what the product was or the vision was. And I think it's self-selecting. And again, I think it's know thyself, no matter who you are. If you're a founder, CEO, or another position, know yourself, and it's okay if things aren't the same anymore and it doesn't work anymore. Just don't waste time. Don't waste the company's time or your time.
I love ending on that note. I know we're at time, but I wanted to take a quick minute to just thank our amazing panelists. Wow, I feel like I've learned a lot, and we're so appreciative of you taking the time to share your insights. It's truly incredible to bring you all together. Hopefully, maybe this has been mutually beneficial as well. We're going to follow up with the recording. If you know any founders or anyone who might benefit from tuning in and listening, feel free to forward this along to them. We'll also follow up with information about how you can get in contact with all of us. And we hope this is just one of many that we can continue to do as we work together. And thank you so much on behalf of all of us at Key Search. Hopefully we can partner with you all as we continue to find the right leaders for the organizations you work for. But thanks again, everyone. Great questions, great audience, and really appreciate all your time.
Thank you, Lenny and Key Search for putting it together. Lovely meeting with my colleagues as well. Bye-bye.
Amazing. Bye, everyone.
Take care.